Every year, more than 4.2 million Americans say, "I do." And every year, around 2.1 million babies are born to married couples. But also every year, around 1 million couples say, "I don't." That's right, the big D, divorce. That all according to the CDC. So what happens to the millions of children stuck in the middle of a judicial system that makes one party a parent and the other a visitor? The numbers show that custodial mothers were about twice as likely to live in poverty as compared to custodial fathers. So the children who were granted over to mom are more likely to be impoverished than those who live with dad. Despite financial difficulties, courts continue to give mothers custodial rights year after year. Not much has changed in 20 years, despite some who argue that judges are adapting to the new cultural norms. Still, only 1 out of 6 dads are likely to be the custodial parent. Child support is probably one of the more contentious areas of child custody. Those who pay out often feel they're paying too much, while those who receive say it's not enough. America is in the red by about $113 billion in back child support. The presumption of deadbeat dads are surely buzzing your head by now, but these sky-high numbers many times stem from dads who simply cannot pay. Those who live in states that have rigid child support charts and do not forgive men who are not high-income earners, or dads who have been incarcerated. Child support arrears quickly becomes crushing debt. Child support ranges from 20% of your net income all the way up to 40% for up to 6 kids. For those who have been surprised by the news that they were fathers years later, to those who have hit hard times or those who are paying their debt to society, child support is one area that allows for modern-day debtors' prisons. The law recognizes no difference between deadbeat from dead broke, and yet, when mom wins custody 85% of the time, her income level is never in question. Dad is punished by this outdated system when he does not meet certain income thresholds. So should only the rich be afforded the rights to see, have, or be near their children? In 1975, President Gerald Ford signed into law Section 4D of the Social Security Act, which placed court-ordered child support funds to fall under the umbrella of social programs such as welfare, TANF, and the like. As such, the amount of child support the custodial parent receives from the non-custodial parent is directly tied to the number of days the non-custodial parent receives from the court. The fewer days granted to the visiting parent, the more money that is due to the custodial parent, numbers which are filed into the federal system by way of the family court. This 1975 system was intended to hold men who did not want to be responsible for their children accountable, not the men who want to be an active parent in their child's life. Those men are simply swept into an outdated system that was meant to bridge the gap and keep women off of welfare and out of poverty. But in 1975, the gender landscape looked different. Today, there are more women graduating college than men. That number is quadruple what it was in the 1970s. Women account for almost exactly half of the workforce in the U.S. at 47%. And today, working moms are the societal norm. 75% of modern moms have full-time jobs. But yet, the rules and guidelines surrounding child support remain based on this severely outdated law. And these aren't just numbers from the U.S. Census Bureau or Centers for Disease Control. These are real people with real stories that share one glaring common denominator. They're all men who have had their role of father diminished by the court. When I started working on my report, I received an outpouring of messages and letters from disenfranchised dads all across the country. For example, a story from Jared in North Carolina. He lost the custody battle to his ex-wife, later to have his child murdered by her new boyfriend. Here's what he told me.
I'd never been convicted of any crimes. In 2003, my daughter was born. And then in 2007, she died of head trauma after months of abuse at the hands of her mother's boyfriend while in her care. I tried making my life and that of my daughter and her mother's life better by trying to keep us together, by getting us away from the toxic environment that was lower mid-Michigan. I spent a year in North Carolina working and building up basic needs for a job, house, new car. When I was ready for them to make the move, my wife had already been seeing someone else, perhaps more than one guy. She also slapped me with a child support order. I abandoned all my plans and fled back to Michigan in an attempt to remain a part of my daughter's life. I got to see my daughter, supervised, for 2 hours a week for 3 months. But eventually, my access to visitation rights was entirely cut. I pleaded with her mother and her mother's lawyer to change this rule, but I was met with deadbeat dad language and denied. So, I was cut from my daughter's life. I saved and saved money in an attempt to hire a lawyer to sue for custody while admittedly avoiding my child support payments. Right or wrong, they denied me rights to even see my daughter. This was my protest. But before I got the chance to start this fight, my daughter was murdered at the hands of my ex-wife's boyfriend. 10 years later, a sheriff of Jackson County, North Carolina, serves me court documents saying I have a case of failure to pay child support being brought against me on a little over $10,000 in arrears. I've tried to get help with the situation, but the stigma of mother bias in child custody and parenting is real and a huge issue for people like myself. It is affecting my life even now, 13 years later.
Jared's story is heartbreaking, but there are many more, like Josh Kresnick's, for example. He's a dad fighting the system for the sake of simply being in his children's lives.
It's assuming that everyone's needs are the same and that everybody's children will be successful in the same type of applied parenting plan. And I think that, you need to start with 50-50 and work backwards from there. I mean, you go for the best. I mean, my children saw both of us every day, myself and my ex-wife, and now that's very different. They talk about wanting to keep things as consistent as possible and as routine and regular and as close as it was to when we were still married. So to say, well, now you're going to see this person 80% of the time and this person 20% of the time, that's the exact opposite of what they're telling us. So I think you need to, again, start with 50-50 and work backwards from there. If it's truly about the children, then you have to look at keeping active fathers and mothers actively engaged in those children's lives and keeping them as accessible to their parents as possible. I get there has to be some sort of a shared time with the kids, but I was an everyday part of their life. Now I'm a once a week part of their life sometimes. I get it that sometimes you need to maybe have the parents be with one parent more than the other, but that shouldn't be the default approach. I think you have to, again, start from 50-50 and work from there. But again, let's ask the kids, what do they want? What would they like to have? I think that needs to be the deciding, the deal, the tiebreaker, I guess, if you will. You have to let the kids have a voice too.
Civil rights movements across the country over the past 50 years claim to have moved mountains to find equality for all in the eyes of the law. But when it comes to custodial rulings in family courts, the numbers show a very different story. Courts rule in favor of moms 5 out of 6 times. Can it be that in the millions of custody cases heard across the country, that only 15% of dads are fit to be the custodial parent? Famed LA-based attorney Gloria Allred once said, "Parties get as much justice as they can afford." So much so that the family law industry has exploded into a $50 billion a year business. For more insight into what feuding parents were faced with in the courtroom and the costly custody battles that ensue, I turned to Steve Goldman, a partner at Curran, Mower & Weiss, a top family law practice in Northern Virginia.
I think the system has a lot of flaws in it that pits two parties against one another, especially when it comes to custody, where parties have to either show that they're a really good parent or show that the other person's a really bad person. And those two things conflict and lead to a lot of animosity, which of course builds up attorney's fee bills and leads to a lot of those problems that you do hear from critics. The truth is, it's that system that builds in this legal process for discovery is one of the most, for example, is one of the most costly parts of litigation, is exchanging documentation, exchanging videos and pictures and whatever else is going to be used at trial could inundate an attorney for weeks leading up to and prepping for a trial, because you have to be entirely prepared for that 1 to 3 day argument, because you don't want to leave any stone unturned. It's also why I think that parents are in a much better situation when they remove themselves from that court system, because then they get to work on their own schedule, talk about what's really important to them and the children without having to impress upon a judge to make a snap decision in their favor during that trial.
Steve has litigated numerous custody battles and believes it's not just in the best interest of his clients to stay out of court, but also for the children who are mired in the middle.
My best advice is to keep that child first, to not put them in the middle of it, to not involve them with the daily disputes, to understand the process and understand that it's about putting the child first, and to speak to people that are going to work with you in that idea, and to find an attorney that is going to embody what you want from this process. Not to shop around on the internet and find whoever's name pops up most often, but to truly speak to different attorneys and make sure you're comfortable with the process that they want to go through, because there are different options. It is no longer a time where you just have to fight and litigate to get what you can for your child. It's a time where there are so many options and so many resources to use that can help two parents work better together, because unequivocally, that's always more valuable for the child. The two parents working together in the future is going to have a much more profound positive effect on the kids than who wins or loses in court.
As I began my research on this taboo topic, I began to wonder why this issue was taboo in the first place. If the topic were that a certain minority group was being disenfranchised or systematically discriminated against in, say, for example, civil courts or criminal courts, we would have heard an outcry from civil rights groups all across the country. There would be protests in the streets. But when millions of men seek fair treatment in the eyes of the family courts, our society turns the other way, ordering them to accept the rubber stamp ruling in mom's favor. Take them like marching orders to war, suck it up, and simply do as you're ordered. And the argument of what's best for the kids? Well, modern-day mental health experts almost all agree, barring those with drug, alcohol, or other abuse issues, gender of parents aside, it's in the best interest of all children to have both parents equally in their lives. Welcome back. Let's delve a little deeper into one segment of American society where it would appear that gender discrimination is the accepted orthodoxy, the family courts. I talked to Dr. Ned Holstein, founder of the National Parents Organization, who promotes shared parenting legislation across the country. He's a practicing physician, but also often serves as a de facto counselor to families who are affected by unequal custody laws in America.
Well, this is a classic case of special interests versus what the public generally believes. We have polled shared parenting or joint physical custody in a number of states using professional survey methods, and we find that the general public overwhelmingly supports shared parenting if both parents are fit and there's been no domestic violence, which is important. And that goes for both men and women. The results we get are typically in the 70% and 80% approval for shared parenting as being the usual and customary outcome under the circumstances that I mentioned. Now, politically, that should be a landslide. But in fact, there are special interests who are standing in the way of that. And we also, to some degree, have a judicial tradition, which for years was teaching them that kids need one home, one decision maker, one set of rules, one place to lay down their books, and so on. But what I like to say to them is something Abraham Lincoln said. He said, whenever I hear anyone arguing for slavery, I feel a strong impulse to see it tried on him personally. So I would like to say to some of these judges, almost none of whom have ever been non-custodial parents, if you think this is so wonderful, why don't you try it in your life and only see your kid 4 times or 3 times a month? If they had that experience, I don't think they would do it. But we do have special interests who are blocking the reforms that are necessary for the well-being of our children. A judge is simply somebody who used to be a lawyer and now they're wearing a black robe. And they were taught in law school, as I said before, that children need one home and one decision maker. And it turns out that that's just plain wrong. It's just dead wrong. It's the opposite of what the kids need. They need the continued love and relationship and guidance of both of those parents whom they love. But some of them have been taught, many of them have been taught that in law school. Many of the legal precedents say that. And so it continues, but it also continues because the bar associations are afraid of losing business. Divorce custody battles are a major bread and butter item for lawyers around the United States. The average lawyer's bread and butter is DUI, slip and fall, a house closing, and a custody battle. A middle-class custody battle can make the lawyer on each side, can allow them to earn $70,000, $50,000, $80,000 in a custody battle for each of them. That's a real nice payday. And I used to think that the reasons were more good faith than that, but at this point in time, you can't overlook, now that we have such an enormous amount of evidence of what's best for children, you cannot overlook the self-interest factor in the attorneys, and these attorneys are the same people who later on become judges, and in fact in most jurisdictions where judges, either whether they're appointed or elected, the bar associations have a huge influence on who becomes a judge. And so, and they're making sure that the people who become judges are people who believe against shared parenting, that is to say that one parent should have 85 or 90% of the parenting time, and that the other parent should be called a visitor and have something called visitation occasionally. One of the big cultural shifts is that gender roles have converged. They've come together, and that includes parenting roles. If you look at the statistics now in young couples, most of them, there are 2 jobs, and most of them are splitting the breadwinning, and they are splitting the household chores, and they are splitting the child care. And there are small differences that go along traditional sex or gender roles, but the differences are very small. So that horse has already left the stable. The courts are way behind. They're acting like it's the 1950s. Oh, dad's a breadwinner and mom's a nurturer of children, and so we're going to give mom custody, and dad's going to be the breadwinner, and if he gets to see him every now and in a long while, he should feel grateful for that. That is so old-fashioned. That is 50 years out of date. Come on, courts, catch up with the real world, with the real life, how families are living today, and the basic fundamental biological fact that children deeply love both their parents. They are attached to both their parents.
And on the subject of gender, Dr. Holstein underscored the equality that most modern couples share, but is critical of the judicial system which operates on 50-year-old ideologies of family.
And there are lots of wonderful attorneys, but the family law sections of these bar associations are dead set against shared parenting. They put up tons of money in every state in which National Parents Organization attempts to get changes in the law that would encourage shared parenting. They promote all kinds of myths about it and misstatements and things that are just simply not true. The same canards keep coming up over and over and over again. Doesn't matter. It's like a vampire movie. You kill a vampire and the vampire comes back to life, and it's not until you drive a stake through the heart of the vampire that it's finally dead. And it's the same way with the myths that they're throwing up about shared parenting. So, then I have to say that, we are true believers in gender equality. We believe, National Parents Organization believes in the equality of men and women in the workplace, in the public sphere, but also at home with kids. And we do believe that fathers and mothers both need to be rolling up their sleeves, getting their hands dirty, and changing diapers. But there are different kinds of feminists. The radical and extreme feminists don't actually believe in equality. They believe in female superiority, and that you can see that in a lot of ways. That may shock some of your viewers, but just look at some of the things they stand for. I'll quote a former Congresswoman, Barbara Jordan. She's passed away now. She was quite well known in her time, very liberal. She said, "I believe that women have a capacity for understanding and compassion which a man structurally does not have. He's just incapable of it." Well, I say go read the Bible, which was mostly written by men. I say go read Shakespeare. He was a man, and go read Leo Tolstoy. Tell me that these people did not have compassion and understanding? It's just not true. But those kinds of attitudes are very similar to the attitudes of some men who say, well, she can't possibly be an astronaut. She can't possibly be a fighter pilot. She can't possibly be an accountant. You know, what's going to happen when her kid gets sick and we have a deal that has to close tomorrow? Well, it turns out that women are great at all those things, and it also turns out that men are great at taking care of kids.
The courts claim to be guided by the best interest of the child. But given that moms are granted custodial rights 5 times more often than dad, what impact might this have on the kids? To answer that, I spoke to renowned child and family psychiatrist Dr. Mark Banshik, author of the book The Intelligent Divorce and developer of Free Divorce Course. I began by asking Dr. Banshik why he's such a proponent for shared parenting.
It's incredibly important to children that parents get along. The research on the outcomes of kids in divorce is very clear. When moms and dads get along, the kids do much better. And when parents can parent together properly in a shared parenting plan, you'd be amazed at the outcomes. When the United States began, men had custody. It was because men were in charge. In the beginning of the 20th century, the idea of the tender years became prominent, which is that children are tender and that mothers can really provide what the kids needed. And so that was the predominant way that judges made decisions until the late 20th century. In the last 20 years, the best interest of the children has been the way people think. And that's inevitably going to move in the direction of fathers having joint custody, both physical custody and legal custody. And I believe, I'm the author of The Intelligent Divorce, and I believe that divorce can be done intelligently, even if it's difficult. I believe that when parents do it together as a binuclear family and not just as a nuclear family, as 2 parents raising a child instead of 1 parent raising a child, and believe me, teenagers need 2 parents. If it's done correctly, the kids can be fine. And I believe in the next 20 years, we're going to be seeing a lot more fathers getting custody in a shared and joint way with parenting plans that are wholesome and good for children. I believe that both women and men are more committed than ever to children. More committed than ever to children. They get jobs, they want to know when they get their time off. They want to know what kind of vacation schedules they have. They want to work it out with their husbands and their wives so that they can raise the child together. And when a woman can't be there, she makes sure her husband is there. And when the husband can't do it, he makes sure she is there. I believe it's a brand new world. If you go into Manhattan or Tokyo or Miami or LA, you see so many men pushing carriages with pleasure, with smiles on their faces. This is the future. Now, the courts catch up. The judges are old, and then they get replaced by new judges, right? And so the new judges are part of the new generation, and they will understand that joint custody is the way to go. Now, let me just explain joint custody briefly. So you have a choice between sole custody and joint custody, and you have a choice between physical custody and legal custody. And what's happening now, and I think in the last 10 years, there's been a switch from sole custody to joint custody. And in fact, in the United States, there are more joint custody agreements than there are sole custody agreements. And that's a huge step forward, and that's the future. I'm excited. It's good for kids.
More than half a century into the women's movement now, perhaps one of its most profound effects was to rightfully convince men that child rearing was not solely the job of the woman, that it too was also the responsibility of the man to be a parent. And today's modern man simply wants to be equal to his female counterpart in the lives of his children. And with the countless stories of deadbeat dads or disappearing dads and the ones who simply don't care, why then do courts take away the dads who do? Thank you for watching. I'm Manila Chan.